Live.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education workshop meeting. Today is Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. The time is now 7:01. With me this evening, I have board member Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig. I have board vice chair Sherry McCready Pritchard. I have member Kara Bakey. I have member Janine Randolph, and I have member Ashley Golias. And with that being said, if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, there's going to be one change in the agenda today. In the work session, letter A, review of monthly financials and budget transfers. We will not be discussing those this evening as we are going to have the capital budget operation, capital budget presentation. Also, if there's anyone that wants to public comments, if the sign-in sheet, if you could please sign in. And anyone online, if you can raise your hand, we will leave public comments open for 5 minutes. And let the record show that Colin Hostin has joined us this evening. We also have Dr. Estrella here with her full cabinet and team. And I will transfer the meeting over to Dr. Alexandra Estrella.
Thank you, Chairperson Carpio. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we begin our preliminary conversations around the FY 24-25 operating and capital budget. This evening, Mr. Lunda Asmani, in collaboration with a number of our cabinet, will be engaging in a conversation with the board, highlighting some of the key drivers for this upcoming fiscal year's budget. I think one of the things that's important to preface that as we thought through this budget, not only will we focus on ensuring that our scholars continue to obtain the academic and social emotional supports that they need, given some of the structures that we put in place around guidance counselors at the elementary school level, increasing providers at the middle school level, because that was one of the areas, as you recall, that we had the highest need given our data, but also making sure that the interventionists that we put in play continue to provide services. Although the pandemic has come to an end, the need continue to exist, and the supports needed to do that work will continue to prevail as we plan forward in the fiscal year 24-25. I think most importantly, in order for us to do this work, we need to make sure that our educators have the time to really plan, prepare, and obtain training where necessary to do the work well. So one of the things that we are really focused in trying to do for the upcoming academic school year is ensure that particularly our elementary school teachers have additional planning time. Currently, our elementary school teachers have 4 preps a week and 1 administrative period, which is not enough to do the important work that they're doing for our students. One of the things that we're hoping to do in fiscal year 24-25 is increase the number of preps to 5, which would be 1 per day, and provide 2 administrative periods that would allow them to engage in more collaborative planning time, particularly teacher team time, to work with their peers around data analysis, having conversations around the students that they're serving, having dialogue around best practices, and really providing opportunities for them to work more intensely together. Even then, it's not enough. We would want more, but I think to start off, it's a good place to be for fiscal year 24-25. And we will continue to look at other ways and opportunities in which we can extend additional time for our staff to have collaborative planning time amongst themselves, but also have that personal time to plan independently and really look at what they need to do to most effectively support our scholars. I would like to welcome Mr. Lunda Asmani, who will begin the dialogue with you today. But before he enters into those segments, I just wanna make a quick correction. In the cover, it's 24-25. There's a typo in the cover sheet. I just wanna rectify. And also just provide some norms around how we're hoping to engage today. We have broken down the presentation in different segments to allow for Q&A because there's so much information that will be presented today. So we're gonna ask if the board can hold questions to those points where we have segmented the presentation to afford the board an opportunity to ask questions. So as Mr. Asmani, as well as other members of the cabinet present, we just ask for the board to write down their questions in the slides associated with the element that they wish to further inquire about. And we will then afford 5-minute intervals in between the different segments so that the board can engage in a Q&A process. So as Mr. Asmani will discuss further, our budget is focused around our 5 key priorities that are driven by our strategic plan. We always put that at the forefront of our conversation. And that's why if you look at element 5, our strategic priority focused around high quality instruction and support, we have highlighted today the importance of elevating or increasing the amount of planning time for our educators across the district. And we're hoping that through this budget process, we can accomplish that. Obviously, the work that we do is always not only tied to our strategic priorities, but the goals and that have been set within that. And I've outlined the 6 goals that we have grounded our work. These are like the overarching top goals. Can you move to the next slide, please? Goal 1, focus on strengthening individual student success. Goal 2, focus on business and operations, really focusing on our facilities, looking at our 3 to 5 year plan and continuing to talk about the 25-year plan that we're working in collaboration with the city. Strengthening our human resources, finance, and business practices to make sure that we have healthy budget cycles that yield the type of outcomes that we want and that are streamlined to the goals and expectations that have been set by the board. Obviously, these goal titles are then tied with obviously SMART goals that the board has approved, that were approved in June of 2023. Goal 4, cultivating instructional leadership, which is tailored around building our leaders' capacity around the work. Goal 5, tailored around the development and refinement of instructional programming and increasing opportunities for students to ensure that all students succeed by providing high quality instruction and support. This directly ties with what I've been emphasizing from the start of this conversation, the importance of increasing planning time for our educators throughout the district, while also maintaining the programs that we already have in play that are key to ensuring academic excellence across the district. Finally, goal 6 is ensuring that our families are engaged and are afforded opportunities to have access to the diverse programming needs across the district. The Family Center is a perfect example of how we've been doing that and how families have taken advantage of the resources provided here to build and expand not only their awareness, but their access to different programs across the organization. I'll turn it over now to Mr. Asmani to walk us through the budget process cycle.
Well, again, good evening, Board of Ed, and thank you for being here and for continuing the conversation. We are again in this phase of the budget where we bring to you. So we're bringing to you some preliminary numbers for us to have conversations and priorities that superintendent in collaboration with the cabinet or our school leaders have set forth before you. What we attempt to do each year is try to enhance and improve and take lessons from prior years in enhancing the process to make it more collaborative and to allow more people to provide input. You recall at the very beginning, we started with a detailed budget book that provides context and information on what we do, how we do, with some indicators, conversation about the process, and provided a much more detailed level of analysis in there. Last year, we further, in addition to the budget book, we built out an entire budget website where we call it the One Source of Truth, where people can go and view information as it becomes available. So as you see information, we upload that information to our budget website so that the public is also able to. This year, in addition to all of those two things, we will also be producing a budget in brief document, which is a document like a Reader's Digest. So it will complement that big book that you get, but it will be a more user-friendly, detailed statistic, just so that the average person who doesn't know who we are and what we're about can have access to that information and begin to understand what we do. You recall that this year we also had a town hall, the first one we've had in quite some time, and all of these are just initiatives to try and bring more people together. So as I go through this presentation, I'll also be collaborating with my cabinet colleagues. They'll come in as subject experts in their specific areas. So you'll see them come and depart as we go through this presentation. But I wanted to kind of recap the budget process briefly. We begin this process around October with a pro forma budget. That's when we start looking at our current complement of staff. We start to project the things that we know. We know our leases, we know salaries and those types of things, we know needs. So we start putting those together, and then we start receiving budget requests around November. Once we've received those requests, we sit together with the cabinet, kind of review those requests. And now we're at this level where the superintendent then has conversation and gets input to build that superintendent's budget recommendation, which you will receive formally next week. But the information that's today is information that will be a significant component of that request. Either in January or in December, as you see fit, you will approve a tentative approved budget that we then move forward to the city. And at that point, we begin the city budget process and review process. Those go January through May. Around March or April, we get some numbers from the city as far as the mayor's recommendation. And we begin then the process of engaging our schools and develop a student-based budget. We have a better knowledge of what the dollars are at that point. And so we look at things like demographics and enrollment, some of which you see this evening, and we use those to base what the student-based budget is. And then in the month of June, I believe it's your last meeting in June, we approved a final budget. At that point, we know what the final numbers we will be receiving from the city. And so we then have to engage in reconciling so that our budget does not exceed the budget that's been appropriated by the city. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell. So what I wanted to provide for you is a brief snapshot, and I'll go into detail of some of these numbers. We talk about we are a people business, but at the end of the day, we're all about the kids. That's who we're here to support. And so this chart kind of shows you who our students are, the 11,000 plus students that we serve. We have MLL students, we have students that have specialized needs. We have students that are on free and reduced lunches. We have students that are very diverse from different nationalities and ethnicities. And so this chart kind of shows all that in a snapshot. At the end of your presentations, there's an appendix that includes these same charts, but blown up in greater detail. So you can kind of see that, but we just wanted to kind of share this snapshot. So obviously the driver of everything is our enrollment. Because our students are what drive our budget. So the next slide you have kind of shows that enrollment history, but it also tells a story. about where we are with enrollment. You recall that during COVID and pre-COVID, we had somewhat of a flattening of our student population, but we are beginning to see an uptick. And so what you have here is our actual enrollment as of October 1, 2023. We also do a December 1. We actually do this monthly, but we also included a December 1 enrollment. And so you can see that in October, we had 11,500 students. In December, we're up to 11,600. Our demographer is projecting that this school year that for which we're having conversations about will be at just under 12,000 students. What we've seen also is we typically have a seasonal uptick of students that enter our system, usually around January. This year, we've seen that uptick come early. That uptick has occurred in December. And so we saw almost a 300 or so addition of students during the time frame. What we're looking to see is if there will also be a January uptick. We've spoken with our demographers. We feel that maybe that uptick came early, but we're closely watching January to see if there will be, in addition to the December uptick, if we'll still have that traditional January uptick. And obviously, if we do, that'll kind of influence this conversation that we're having now. The other thing I think that is important to emphasize when we talk about enrollment is the mix of our students. That although our student population may not increase by significant amounts, but the composition of our student body and the needs of those student body increases quite significantly more. And so this chart here shows our MLL enrollment within the district. And you can see that between 2021 and 2022 fiscal year, we had an increase of almost 300 MLL students in the district. As we go through this presentation, we'll also have a conversation about students in our district that require specialized needs. And we're also seeing that we have more of those students. So whereas our total population count may not increase significantly, but the type of needs and services that our students need does. And so that impacts the budget. So it's important to look at those two numbers, to get those three numbers together and not solely focus on the total enrollment. At this point, I'll stop if there are any questions regarding demographics before I proceed.
I do have a question about the demographer's prediction. Are there, did he or she share what that would be quite an increase, 300 more students. What's driving that?
So there are a number of factors in it.
Yeah, we actually had Jean run a report for us, Jean Starkman. Let me tell you, because we requested to better understand where these students were coming from. And it wasn't all from, Kristen, do you remember what she responded? It wasn't.
She said some of the students were coming in earlier than they typically do. We usually see the bump in January. Same countries where we're getting the influx.
Same countries, but I think it also included like some students from Haiti and students, like there were some other languages that were represented that we had, that I don't remember seeing
I can try
quite in the same way that we had last year. I remember that just being one of the things that stood out to me were our the Haitian students having increased with this current increase in student numbers. What is causing it? You know, we don't know. That was just a basic numbers report, so it doesn't actually give us that anecdotal information to know why families are coming right now. We do know traditionally in January, we do get quite a few families. It also tends to be when there's a break in school season in a lot of those countries. And so then the students, they see that as kind of a transition time for them to be able to bring students over to join us.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then we're looking at students that are coming from another country.
Correct.
And not just coming from another state because there's an economic opportunity here.
That is correct. So a lot of the students that are arriving are newcomers, or what we consider newcomers. We're still learning more about them to see if there had been interrupted education or those other factors that traditionally follow that demographic, but we haven't gotten down to that level of detail yet.
Okay,
To confirm, agreeing with you, Sandra, Jean had mentioned Haiti, Venezuela, Guatemala, and Honduras.
Okay, yeah. So Haiti is the newer piece.
so the takeaway is that these students, well, we welcome them very much, would possibly have more needs than if they were coming from that Michigan or another
Correct.
English speaking.
The other issue that the
area.
demographer also pointed out was that we're returning back to the 3-year average pre-pandemic. Because during the pandemic and a couple of years post-pandemic, we had kind of flattened out.
Yes,
And so the rate of increase that we're seeing now is actually consistent with the pre-pandemic rates.
That is correct.
So we're getting back to kind of our normal trend of enrollment because there was a pause. And so that's why you're seeing that spike, because for about 3 or 4 years, you saw a flattening. But this is more consistent with Norwalk enrollment patterns pre-pandemic.
all right, so then our population is projected to increase, not stay flat.
Correct.
Well, and we're already seeing that this year.
And I think it's important to know, you brought up an important point that although our numbers have been increasing, not as a faster rate as expected, the number of students requiring additional service has increased significantly. So although our overall total enrollment has not exponentially grown, the need has. And the amount of resources required to service the number of special education students that we will speak of later and MLO students is significant and requires additional resources.
So that is central to our discussion budget.
It is.
So just to highlight in terms, continuing along that demographics and our student enrollment is, I had shared these charts before just to kind of share how our students are performing. And we are still, although not where we want to be, but Norwalk Public Schools, when it comes to English language arts, math and science, have been performing better than our peer cities. It's important to compare ourselves with peers and not with some of the other towns around us. So these slides kind of show where we rank in terms of our peers. And this is the most recent data we received looking at the 2023 numbers. You'll see that Norwalk ranks above all of our peer cities. And so we're number one in those peers in all of these categories. And it's also true for English language arts and math as well. So I want to now shift to our capital budget request. I'll start by talking about the capital budget and then our operating budget. And so before you and my colleagues will come in and talk about the different programs, but before they do, I did want to point out that one thing that is different this year, we have our typical capital budget requests that are recurring every year. But this year you see that there is the air conditioning program at 9.1 million. And Ms. Vallejos will speak more to that. But then also within this capital budget, there's also 3.3 million for additional land acquisition at the South Norwalk School. Typically, once a project is created like the South Norwalk School and we have these additional expenses, in the past, we've been able to go to other projects that have been appropriated, but we haven't fully expended the funds. For example, we have money left over at Cranberry, at Jefferson, and so usually we would use those monies from Board of Ed projects to cover some of these other projects. In this instance, we've kind of exhausted some of those funds. And so the city did come to us and say, because there isn't an opportunity to transfer from any existing project, we need to have a new appropriation for the land acquisition and some site work at the school. So you'll see that in addition to the 9.1, we have the 3.3 million for the Soto School, and then all the other projects are kind of our annual recurring projects. In conversations we had with the city, it was our hope that because we have these unusual expenses, the 9.1 and the 3.3 for Sono, they don't somewhat cannibalize our more traditional capital budget expenses like string equipment, textbooks, and all of that, because there's focus on these big ticket items. So we've did have that conversation with the city. At this point, if I could welcome my colleagues to kind of speak to their individual projects.
Just for the record, we're gonna have Ms. Sandra Fayo's speak about some of the facilities operational component. We're gonna have Ralph Valenci speak about digital learning. And Rob Pennington will speak to some of the instructional materials and resources.
So I will kick us off. And if you look at the first line item, you can see band and strings instrument replacements. And last year, we put in a similar request and we were able to add a plethora of band equipment across our district. We started in our high school and that supported our middle school and elementary school as well. This year, our real focus is around strings. So we focused on one and now we're going to focus on the other so that we can continue with that same effort to support all of our students in the district. And then the second component, if you go to the fourth one down, it's curriculum materials and textbooks. There are two different areas that we are focusing on. One of them is social studies. And as you know, we've talked a little bit about the state has rolled out a new framework with content standards embedded. And so part of that work that we are doing as a district is to really adjust our social studies curricula. And then this will help to purchase materials to support that work. And we're starting right now. And that we'll purchase some this year. And for next year, we will continue that rollout and purchase the rest of the materials. The other layer in this section is around science. We've received a lot of feedback from our educators that our science could use some updating and some work. So we as a district heard that and are going to be doing work with our science educators to transform science and get new materials to support the work that they're doing. The two layers tied to curriculum instruction.
Let's move the mic.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Nice to see everybody. Mine is longer than Rob's. Okay, so I'll try to go as quickly as possible. One of the first items are our enhancement to school security. You will see that there is an $86,500 ask. This actually is lower than what we had anticipated. Every year we had done a three-prong approach, a three-phase approach to enhancing our security infrastructure and our ability to communicate as far as school safety is concerned. And the mayor and the city have been very generous with us during the last two capital requests to actually provide us that full funding. We were actually able to do a lot more with the funding that we had. And so then rather than the typical $900,000 to $1 million ask that we have done in the past, we were able to actually fulfill a lot of those projects within 2 years. And we were able to renegotiate some of the prices for the things that have been done. So what we have left is an $86,000 price tag, which will allow us to add additional cameras. Our final school is Brian McMahon. All the other enhancements have been made across all other 23 buildings with Brian McMahon being the 24th. And we also have an ask here in order for us to continue to work with recreations and parks in repairing and fencing and also installing some privacy screens that schools have requested from us. And additionally, we want to replace an old camera server to make sure that we're actually providing the technology upgrades that we need. So that's that first ask, but it's a much smaller ask than what I had anticipated. And we hope that the city supports it once again. We will also be asking for $125,000 to expand our Montessori program at Brookside. We're finally ready to have an upper Montessori classroom.
which is super exciting. The upper Montessori classroom starts at grade 3. And all those students have been with us from preschool. I was actually there. And now they're ready to go into 3rd grade. And it's very exciting to see that. For the next school year, there will be 8 students. And then after that, in 25-26, there will be 11 additional students. And then in 26-27, there'll be 8 additional students in that classroom. And so then the 125 is to outfit one of their existing rooms into a Montessori room, and then being able to buy them the necessary supplies and the instructional supplies that go along with it. We are asking for something that has come up quite often in our conversations with our SGCs and PTOs and PTAs at our middle schools, something that the middle school principals have been asking for quite some time, which is the replacement of our lockers. All of the lockers in all 4 of our middle schools are original to the building. So you can imagine what they look like. The one at the lockers at Rowton, which right now take the priority, are too small to actually fit binders. Okay. And many of them are missing doors. They don't actually lock, which then actually makes them obsolete because lockers are supposed to lock. And they actually are jagged and are really, really in bad shape. So we are planning to do this as a 4-year ask, starting with 500,000. We did get quite a few different quotes for lockers. This is the cheapest one we were able to find. And as you can imagine, replacing that many lockers is pretty expensive.
Can I just say
course you can.
that, particularly with the lockers, was something that we added as a result of our conversations with SGCs on a monthly basis. One of the things that we're doing is meeting with all of the SGCs across the district, in addition to PTA leadership, to learn about what are some of the things that are working well at the school, what are some of the things that they consider needs to be elevated to our attention, that they would like us to keep in mind, particularly as we think through capital and operating budget. And this was one that came up in every single middle school conversation, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that it was at the top of the list as we talked about the capital budget.
Thank you. The next one is continuing with our air conditioning program. You will have sticker shock when you see that 9,132,585. That is actually just for one facility. It's for the Brian McMahon facility. As you know, the Brian McMahon facility is coming actually to the end of its its end of life. And it actually was done without a redundancy. So when it breaks down, it's really quite expensive to bring in a chilling system until we actually get the parts that we need to keep the building cool. This is one of the items that we are applying for with the HVAC grant. The reason why it's here, it's because all of the projects, all 6 projects that we've applied for in the HVAC grant, we have actually listed in our long-term plan for a capital request in case we don't get the grant, so that everyone is aware of what the ask will be and what the cost actually will be if we don't take advantage of certain reimbursements. So currently the HVAC grant would actually allow us to get 60% reimbursement. This is one of the projects that we have submitted the grant for. The grant gets submitted next week. The final date for the grant is December 31st, and I expect that it will take a couple of months for us to hear. Should that be granted to us and the project gets approved, we then would assume that this is avoided from the ask. We also are requesting capital repairs and replacements. It's something that we ask for every year. We typically budget or ask for 250,000. We always go over that 250,000, but this is just for repairs, things that happen, leaks. This is not for preventative maintenance. It's really just for us to deal with emergencies as they come up.
And that's something that we have to always have, be mindful of, because we do have 24 facilities that we care for that are aging, although some are newer now, and we're grateful for that. We plan on continuing our ask for the paving. We've done that also for a number of years. We are asking for this year to do 2 schools for Brookside and Kendall. And we will have remaining after that, Brian McMahon, and eventually, correction, Rowayton, and eventually Brian McMahon. Brian McMahon is going to be a much larger project because that school community has actually asked us not to repave, but actually rethink that whole parking lot. So we would have to think about that more long term. So we keep pushing it on because we can't afford to do that while the new Norwalk High P-Tech is under construction. So that'll be some time away. And we're going to continue our oil tank removal. These existing tanks are at the end of their life and they have to be removed under Connecticut law. We are planning on doing Tracy School and then removing Brookside. That's just the removing. And then what we'll have remaining is still Brian McMahon. And then we have $200,000 that we are asking for improved heating systems. Again, we have submitted an application with the state for the heating system. So we hope that if we get that, for Marvin is one of the schools where we experience a lot of heating issues with, that we then can use those funds to be able to then provide that assistance here. And then the asbestos program is another program that we've had going on for a while. There is no current danger in asbestos, so I want to make sure that we state that. But by state law, we also need to replace all existing asbestos materials. And the state does allow us to have a program for that. We're asking to actually remove the floor tiles and the ceiling tiles at Wolf Pit. Marvin then still needs to get done with their floor tiles, and then Fox Run. And then you will see that there is the land acquisition that we're requesting that Linda actually spoke of a little bit ago. That is for $3,370,000. And if I could help to explain that a little bit better, the land acquisition is about 1.3 million. Tenant relocation is about 200,000. And then to actually develop those sites is it's almost $2 million. And then I believe I skipped one. Because is it a district vehicle?
Yes.
And then finally, the food service truck, or the request for trucks. We're doing it now, hoping that then we can get the truck in 5 years, because what ends up happening is that it takes a really long time to get. I don't know if you guys remember, but a few years ago, you approved a facilities truck, but it's a propane truck, so it takes a really long time to. So we still haven't gotten that truck, even though it was approved. I think 3 years ago is when it was approved. So we do need a food service truck. It has to be refrigerated. The one that we had broke down, we're only down to one. And that is a requirement that inevitably we'll have to face at some point. I believe that's the end of my requests. Thank you so much.
Well,
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everybody. So I have actually 4 different items like I just want to kind of review with you quickly. The first is the item labeled as networking equipment. So if you think of networking equipment, this is stuff that's actually inside the walls or those white access points, which is really the majority of what we need to replace. This is something that we need to do, just like we recycle computers. About every 4 years, we want to be on a recycle cycle for access points being replaced too. So this includes upgrades to our server storage. It includes upgrades to our security servers, as well as upgrades to our access points. The reason it's actually at what it is because we also receive E-rate funding to be able to offset some of those. So there's a prorated version we apply for them, and some things actually get somewhat federally reimbursed. But we do have like I said, our networking equipment does need to be upgraded on a regular basis. The second item on there is classroom technology. This refers specifically to the ViewSonic boards that you're seeing right here behind you that we're seeing some right now in the room. Currently, every one of our classrooms pretty much is outfitted now with ViewSonic board. We have a few that will need to be replaced. So the amount that's in there is for approximately about 20. So we are actually really well stocked. We were lucky this past year, besides having our capital funds, to receive a state grant that allowed us to put in an additional $150,000 worth of ViewSonic boards, which was not something that we had to budget for. So that actually offset where we were there, which was very, very helpful. But so we do know that we're going to need some replacements this coming year. One of the bigger areas right now, though, too, is our teacher desktops and, teacher laptops, monitors, and then some of the office desktops. And that's what you see there is, once again, it's the same thing. It's a cycle. This is not for all of our teachers. We're really estimating at least 150 is really what we want to replace in this coming year, but we need to do that on a regular basis. Machines get old. And then finally, the last item on there, which is the bigger one that's at the bottom, is instructional technology. That refers specifically to only student technology devices. We have it listed at the bottom because we are we've applied for some additional funding. We hope to receive it, and once we do, we would like to be able to say that this is actually something then that would be able to be removed because we will actually have it covered in another format. So, but for now, we do need to make sure that we've actually bookmarked that we have to keep on a refresh cycle, and on average, 900,000 to 1.2 million to replace. When you think about it, we have 12,000 students. If they're on a 4-year cycle with their machines, that's 3,000 computers a year for the students that need to be replaced in order for us just to kind of keep current.
And I think one of the great things if we acquire this grant is that it won't only provide hardware, but it's also going to provide broadband connectivity for all of the students that will have the device at the middle and high school level. It also provides coaching funding as well, similarly to what we have acquired in the past. So the amount of resources we will obtain if this grant is awarded will surpass the $885,000 that we're asking for in this capital request.
Thank you.
At this point, we'd like to pause if there are any questions related to the capital budget before we move on to the next phase.
That number that you had, there was a cooling plant upgrade. Is that related to the Brian McMahon, the 9.1?
It is. It was originally, that actually was given to us last year. It was approved. And it's for us to be able to conduct the study and the planning for the upgrade.
So next question. So what's the plan B if we don't get the grant?
The plan B is to actually have a serious sit down with the city around what does that mean for Brian McMahon, because it's an incredibly expensive project.
Right.
We all know, though, how impacted students and staff are when the building is not adequately cooled or heated.
And the costs associated
with it, and the early dismissals and the impact of that. So we would have to, the plan B is this is plan B. Plan A is to hopefully get the HVAC grant. Of course. This is plan B. But thank you for asking.
I have a question just about sort of reimbursements in general for some of these things. I know, so for example, for the air conditioning at Brian McMahon, we had the grant and that would cover 60%, you said?
Yes.
So
the 40%
would still have to be.
So the city has, in order for us to actually have applied for that HVAC grant, the city had to actually approve and allocate those funds. So that actually has gone through.
Oh, good.
And it went through I think just this past week was the final approval, I believe, unless I'm still missing a meeting and they have to go to common council tomorrow. But it's gone through all the necessary appropriation and the city has been supportive with us applying for this grant, recognizing the savings that it'll yield if we actually get all 6 projects, or even if you get one, it'll actually be incredible.
Yeah, Esther.
Mhm.
So the 9 million represents the 60% or the full amount?
This is the full amount.
Got it, okay,
So this is the plan B, which
Got
is.
They don't have- got it.
Then this is how much it would cost us, just so that we start to inform the city and inform the public of what that price tag is just for Brian McMahon.
Yeah.
And in our long-term plan that we have to submit for the city, we have all the other projects actually priced out because we had to do it for the grant. We had to actually do all of the estimates, the cost, the professional cost estimates.
Thank you.
Colin, as follow-up, as a requirement for the grant, we had to have approved the fee. You
Got
had
it.
to show that, we have skin in the game.
Yep, yep.
And we can't apply for it without that. So that's why it was necessary for the city to move forward and do their appropriation so that we could apply for it, because without that, we wouldn't be able to.
I love the team effort.
Is
Yes.
that 40 going to be part of this, or that 40
No.
is
Totally separate.
in a separate, not part of?
Correct. Not part of this at all. Got it. Thank you.
And just considering on reimbursements, I fear I may know the answer, but like for some things like where, for example, we're required to replace fuel tanks and do ADA compliance and asbestos abatement and so on. Do those come with any state reimbursements? Like I know.
No, I don't believe so. Not those. We do get some alliance funds for some school construction projects, but I don't believe that those necessarily are qualified for reimbursement.
You mentioned that the Cranberry and Jefferson funds that might have gone towards that
Mhm.
3 million for the Sono School have been exhausted. What were those exhausted on?
No, so what happens throughout the capital budget process, you be given an appropriation. You're gonna build a school and or a project, you estimate X million, or even a truck is a good example, right? You budget 200,000 to buy this truck, we go out for bid. We're approved 200,000 and then we get the truck for 170. So you have 30,000 of unspent money that's already been appropriated. So usually what happens, and you look at this citywide and on the Board of Ed side. So when you have other projects that come up that have additional needs beyond what is appropriated, the first thing we do is we look at what are the completed projects that have some money left over, and then we kind of sweep those projects. So for example, I believe recently, actually, some of the South Norwalk initial funding from the South Norwalk School was money that was unspent from Jefferson. And so that was applied to South Norwalk School. So then that lowered the amount that we needed to borrow for South Norwalk School. So this movement of money happens periodically throughout the district.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was just wondering what.
Yeah, it gets
What it's.
Yeah.
gone-
It gets
those have gone
put
towards.
back into school construction projects though.
So it's all construction.
Yeah. And so then one of the things, or school construction projects may be involving other sectors, but it related to school construction. So this is actually more expensive than what we're asking for. But the city has 1.9 million already on hold. That was from this sweep of these smaller projects that they were able to actually allocate to this land
For the
acquisition.
Sono School.
Yes, for the Sono School. And then what we're asking for is in what they are not able to cover.
And just remember, we don't directly manage these funds. These are city funds
City
and they are the ones that appropriate.
That's a good thing to think about. And I was reminded when we walked around Sono, the new
The
property,
site.
that just that distinction, it belongs to the city.
Correct.
The city is purchasing this. Could I ask you to unpack that you were saying that 2 million of the 3.3 million was for one thing on Sunny Pool?
Yes.
If you could
Let me
just
pull out my
through that.
and low notes.
I have.
You have it also? Okay.
So what happened was there was 1.3 million was identified for the additional purpose. We actually just got the bid today. They came in, we updated this number
1.3 million.
early this afternoon.
1.3.
1.3 million.
Four.
1.3 million was for
The actual
the
acquisition.
actual acquisition. 1.3 million was the actual acquisition. And then there's an additional 1.7 just for development of the site so that you can actually start construction on it. So that's 1.7, and then there is about 200,000 for contingency, and then within those funds, you also have tenant relocation. Because when you do eminent domain, you're also responsible to relocate those tenants. So that's part of that. So.
All right, that's helpful. That's helpful. So the land is actually 1.3 million. Development is more than.
Yeah, 1.7.
Development, that includes relocations.
And then the relocation, that 200K, where's the, is that saying that's the cost of the buildings and the land?
No.
No, the 200K is contingency. We usually do a 5% contingency on the project. But the relocation is it's set aside, and that's all handled by the city and the city attorneys, and they go through that process of determining what the relocation amounts are.
Okay, so if I'm understanding it, the purchasing or in some manner giving some money to the owners of the buildings. that
Correct.
Have been.
There's 8 tenants, actually.
So those owners of those buildings get part of the 1.3 million. No, I don't have it right.
That's okay, but because I think it's actually Lunda's fault. He's being very, very confusing.
No, I
So 1.3 is just to purchase the land, right, and the building, just that.
Okay.
And the additional 200,000 is given to the tenants
Yes.
and to the people who owned it in order for them to relocate somewhere else. So that's on top of the 1.3.
Yeah.
And then after all of that is said and done, you actually have to develop that site. So you have to like tear things down and do all the things that we would have to do in order to actually then make it useful as part of the school. And that's 1.87. So it's those 3 phases. So all together, it comes up to that almost 3.4 million.
Yes.
And to be more confusing, the 3.4 is the addition, because remember, we mentioned that there was already some
There's
other.
already some other
that was
money
already
set
found.
aside by the
So
city.
this is just the gap.
The gap.
This is the gap in all of that, yes.
So I guess we're hoping that this is not going to trump some other stuff. I know that's.
We were very clear with the city, and we're being very transparent with you also that this is something that we hadn't planned for. Obviously, it's for a new school, so it benefits us also, but it wasn't something that was part of our traditional ask, which is all these other maintenance programs that we ask for and all of these other things that we do typically ask for, just to make sure that we're still meeting those obligations.
And you might have to plan B that too. I mean, I'm just saying if that, I mean, we don't know, but if, that were to happen, that they weren't gonna fund something that is needed because they're coming up with that.
It's just important for us to be educated on why we're asking certain things so that if the public or anybody else brings up like, well, you're asking about $9 million just for air conditioning, that we have a good answer, which is we're hoping that the grant comes in. But we want to make sure that it's on the books and that it's stated that this is a need and eventually we're going to have to face
That's for
that
the chiller
need.
system, right? Over Grand McMahon, that's the chiller. It's like, I can't believe when they did that building, that was.
That they
it's
didn't
been a
do it
while,
like that in
2007, that big renovation and didn't put in something. It's just nuts. Anyway,
It's also
it is what it
been,
is.
but it's also been a long time. I
Right,
think
so-
sometimes we think of Brian
Right.
McMahon as a new school. And I
Right,
think it's,
that was,
I
it's a
think,
while.
when was that?
2007 was when they finished it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're approaching,
Yeah.
in 4 years, we're approaching
Okay.
20 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I had a question on curriculum, Rob.
Sure.
So the social studies and science curricula materials and programming, at what grade level would that be initiated?
So we're working K-12.
So starting at K all the way up to
Absolutely.
12. And is training for teachers and staff factored into this amount
Absolutely.
here?
Well, I mean, it's not factored into this amount. This is just for materials.
It's just material.
So for capital, we can use it for materials, but we do have
Training.
training and they're part of process throughout even this, starting in January, where we're going to be working with teams of teachers where they're going to be coming in and working on developing our curricula and then linking materials to that work.
Sorry, just going back to Sona real quick. I know when we approved the initial appropriation for the new school, there was also state legislation that upped our reimbursement for new school construction to 60% for the next 20 years. Does that include land acquisition?
I don't believe so.
Of course.
But I don't want to misquote, but I don't believe so. I think the land acquisition is not reimbursable.
That is new construction. It's based on our original reimbursement rate.
Yeah, but I think the land acquisition is not part of the project. When you submit the project, you build, it's the actual project. But I don't want to be, it's an area of ignorance for me as to like that piece of the reimbursement because it falls on the project side of the city. I can definitely get you a concrete response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the development, the 1.7 million, that's part of the development is still part of land acquisition.
Yes.
For this.
Yes, absolutely. Mhm.
I have a few more questions on the curriculum for social studies. Is the state requiring a certain textbook? Or so?
No, they have a framework, and so we will align our curricula and our units to that framework.
So that's new, but the science is not new. That's the NGSS,
Correct.
that are,
And so
the state
Which-
adopted the national
Correct.
standard. So my question is about, will there be textbooks involved in this?
There may-
Or will the teachers be able to choose and make
correct.
recommendations on
So
what supplies?
So part of the conversation that developed with science is there was purchase of a curriculum or resources, I'd say 7-8 years ago. And that has been the resource that we've been using, and the feedback from the field, feedback from our educators is that they're looking for something that could be more engaging for our students. And so we had a survey that was put out, we got information, and so now we're gonna bring in different resources and the teachers are going to look and provide feedback on those resources. So
It hasn't been
it
decided.
it has
You're
not been
saying,
decided,
you know, not new standards for science,
not new.
new frameworks for social studies. But in both cases, the teachers are involved in deciding what materials.
Sure, yes.
Okay. That sounds good.
I have a question about the Montessori program. What is needed for, so the creating the classroom in the immediate future is just for the 8 children that are gonna be coming into the 3rd grade next
For next
year.
year.
I mean, I imagine there's not construction, right, like the space.
No, it's
or
just
what-
outfitting. So it's we outfit the classroom with like a refrigerator, a sink, you basically just, there's no actual construction, like hard construction. In the earlier grades, there was more construction. But as they get older, the skills that they're working on are not as intensive as the life skills in the younger years. So we've done it for another classroom just this past year.
Okay.
But that also includes the actual furniture. It's a very specific program that has very specific guidelines in order for us to meet the standards of a Montessori. And then there's a lot of materials that also go with it.
Do we anticipate the program continuing to
Oh, yeah.
grow?
Oh, yeah, it's a very well-attended program with a wait list.
Okay.
Yes,
What is the limit of how many we accept?
for the class, per classroom, it follows our current contract. So for those, that grade, it's 24. Alan Lowe says no reimbursement.
Okay.
Okay, it's official. No, I texted him. I said I could just text him, so I texted him.
It's like we try.
Any other questions on capital before we move on to the operating side of the budget? Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of these characters will come back.
Oh, I was
You're
like.
one of the characters. So now we're gonna shift to the operating budget. And as you've heard me say multiple times is, our operating budget is made up of three buckets. We have the general fund, which is by far the largest. In this preliminary request, it represents 85% of the overall budget. We have our school lunch fund at just over 7.1 million, that represents 2%. And then we're fortunate to receive grants that also allow us to offset the need of tax supported dollars to the tune of 36.7 million, which represents about 13%. As you've heard me say before, when you look at this pie chart, we are an organization of just over $250 million. So there is a lot of activity that goes through this district. So I'll go over a summary of all of these. Within your packets, there is detailed line item of all of these funds at the detailed object level. The line item actually includes a 5-year history, 3 years of actual, the current budget, and the request. So I think that begins on like page 40 or something, so, but you have that as well. I'm going to go over the summary, but you have that information within your packets. And then once I go over the summary of the grant funds, Ms. Flores will unconfuse you and go into the details. So in terms of the budget for the grants, you'll see that in the current year, FY24, our grant budget is 33.8 million. In the preliminary numbers for 25, the budget is 36.7 million, about an 8.7% increase. The way that we do grants is grants, unlike the general fund, allow us to use over multiple years. And so what you see in FY25, those are not necessarily new dollars, but those are dollars from prior years that were unspent, and they roll over into the next year. So you'll see that on this chart, you have a summary broken down by the major categories, salaries, benefits, like you see for all of the other funds. I will note, and Ms. Fayos will talk more about it, you see that there's a 7.9% increase in salary specifically in this. In the overall grant summary, you recall that we were fortunate to receive the Magnet School Assistance Program, that $15 million grant. It's a 5-year grant. This year, we have about 2.9 million in this year. This grant for this year, we have 9 positions, I believe, that are budgeted in this year. So that's a big driver of this grant. And so that's what's driving the 7%. And then this is the same chart, but looking at it by the major categories. I've highlighted 2 of our major grants this year. Obviously, I mentioned about the Magnet School Assistance Program. And then we were also fortunate to receive a Marine Science grant this year. So you'll see those kind of like an outlier where you only have one number in FY25. You don't have any numbers before that because that is a new grant. Many of the grants that we receive are recurring. You'll see at the very top of the list, you have the coronavirus grant and then the SR 123. These are grants that we received during the pandemic. They've been phased out. And so you'll see that those numbers have gone away. We do have a sliver of SR 3 grant that we received this year. That's just under $1 million. And I'll pass it on to Ms. Fayos to kind of talk more about the grant process and how we use grants, what we can't do with grants, and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And this is just a really high level. So there's the actual, if you're ever interested in seeing what the grants are that we have right now, I'm holding it in front of me, and it actually would take up like quite a few slides. So we really do try to highlight the grants that make the biggest impact, but there are all sorts of small grants that we apply for And for us, a small grant is like $100,000 grant or a $50,000 grant is a small grant for us because we've been used to working with such large grant amounts. But they're actually pretty impactful when they target a program. Just so that you know that the danger with grants is that it comes with all sorts of strings attached. So you have to adhere to the language of the grant and the application. They are competitive, which means that you have to make sure that you're progress monitoring and that you're actually have the manpower to make sure that the funds are actually being expended the way that the grant dictates them. And then a lot of them, or most of them, have an expectancy that you then absorb the program back into your operation funds or your operational budget. So I do want to preface that we're pretty aggressive about going out for grants, but they do run out, and then those programs are still needed. And then we end up having to bring them back into our budget, which is what happened with some of the ESSER funds. And I think I can speak to definitely the reading and the reading, writing, and the math improvement teacher was one that we thought was very important for us to still maintain that we then had to absorb. So the marine science grant will eventually go away, but we want to maintain the marine science pathways. So those are always the things that we have to make sure that we're highlighting. And the process tends to be the same for most of them. A grant comes out, we apply for that grant, they're looking to fund something very specific. And we then take advantage of making sure that we can actually fulfill the language of the grant. You can't take the money from one grant and then spend it on something else because then you would be in violation of the grant application. Anything else, Alex, that I should highlight with the grants, do you think?
I think you, go ahead.
Sorry, how about the time it takes to apply for these grants?
Well, this HVAC grant, for instance, that we're working in collaboration with the city, we've been working on it since August when it was released. There's a project manager that's actually just assigned to this HVAC grant. And then we have all of the efforts of myself, Bill Hodel, and Nina Laria, just working on those 6 grant applications. And then all the meetings that you go to for the necessary approvals. So some are really, really very complex. Other ones are more straightforward because it aligns very well with like our curriculum. And so then we're able to draw from that. But the marine science grant, I think, took maybe like 2 or 3 weeks just to complete. And then we had revisions that we needed to make. And then eventually we were able to get it through, but it's a $1.3 million grant. So it's actually pretty.
How many years is that marine science grant? Is it 1 year, 2 years?
I think it's 3 years.
Oh, 3 years.
Mhm.
Going back to the HVAC grant.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to connect some of the dots. Is this the grant from the state that went out a couple years ago?
Yes.
And not many towns sent something in and they were rejected.
Correct.
And
we were rejected also.
We were rejected.
We were rejected.
And then they were sitting on all this money from the feds. And then they were criticized for why are you making it so difficult when it's really needed? And so you're catching the second round of that.
Yes.
And did the state reach out to us and give more instruction? I mean, it sounds quite intensive if you've been working on it since August with a team. Did they, kind of coach a little bit? We want you to, we want it to work. This is what we're looking for.
No, but I think they had gotten a lot of feedback from what the glitches had occurred. So there was a series of uploads that you had to do. And I think for us, what we discovered was that a document that we could see on our side, they couldn't see on their side. However, I think that whole process had come under quite heavy criticism.
Yes.
Because most of the districts that were accepted, with the exception of a couple, were not urban districts. So then there was,
yes.
yeah, so there was some criticism on like the demographic that got to take advantage of the grant. So I think that there was the technical aspects that had to be addressed, but then there was also just the process by which school districts were chosen for the grant that I think also we're hoping for a different outcome.
I join you in that hope.
Thank you.
For the IDEA grant, it's federal. So do we get state for that too, or is that federal money that comes through the state that we get?
Correct, right? Mhm.
So we don't get a separate state money. It's not like rolled into the ECS. Okay.
And I'm sorry, am I reading the ECS line correctly? Like, I know there's been a slight recalculation of that equation and, but is our ECS projection for FY 25 $200,000? Or is that
The excessive cost grant?
the education cost sharing?
There's two pieces to that.
Oh,
There's the exit, that's the 2%. The 2%
That's the new
is the, after they do the initial appropriation of the grant, there's some leftover money, and so there's like a second round, which is usually a smaller amount than the initial. So that's what you see even historically, we hover around the $200,000 range.
Got it.
But that's not the full, that's the second phase.
Where would we see the full ECS?
Let's see.
It's like 3.6 or something.
Yeah, it's like
I
three.
thought we had 2 million more this year than we had previously, but
No.
no?
Where were you looking, Colin? What were you?
FY 16,
Excess cost 2%.
Oh, okay.
On the bottom, I see it.
Yeah, it's traditionally been 200,000. Now, there was some communication that had come out that the ECS was going to be increased,
Yes.
but we didn't see it on our side.
I did not see.
We
it.
did not see it on our side.
So this week, I was talking with a legislator who I had thought I read it that we had
We read the same
million
thing.
more.
Oh, no,
She said she was surprised that was so low. So
no.
I'm really baffled.
Yeah, we did not see it on our side.
You did not see an increase.
Well, we saw an increase, but it was not the increase that.
Not at 2
No, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make sure we stay to protocol so that we don't get bogged down.
Okay.
So can we complete some of the slides that we have set and then leave the Q&A for that segment? Just write down your questions, just so that we stay in this cycle. How we was.
So the second bucket is a school lunch fund, and so these funds are school lunch program, and as I've shared in the past, this is one where it doesn't fully self-support itself. And so historically, we have been subsidizing this account. We were fortunate in fiscal year 21, 22, and 23 with some of the federal funds that came in. We did not have to subsidize this account. And so we had built some additional reserves. And I believe this year, we had actually called the state for permission to continue to draw down, and they provided us that permission. We are now at a point where we've kind of exhausted the drawdown. So within this budget, and when I talk about the general fund, when I talk about the drivers, we are projecting that we will need $1.2 million to go into the school lunch fund from the general fund. And so that is included in the preliminary numbers. We're watching this year. We may just break even this year, but there is a chance that this year we may have to dip into the general fund for $300,000 or $400,000 or so. We didn't budget for that this year, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of to get by. But if not, we may be coming back to you, or towards the end of the year, part of that rollover amount, if there is any, we will need to move into this account. And then I know Sandra wants to briefly talk about some of the changing in the programming and of the school lunch fund with the I won't go into detail because I'll just introduce that.
Thank you. So just so that you remember, we are a district that has free meals for all students because of our community eligibility program qualification. We had always run a deficit. There was an approval from this board 2 years ago to actually move forward with the application for CEP. Prior to this, we were running about a $927,000 deficit. This was to cover families that were not able to pay their school lunch funds. Prior to that, we used to basically not give students access to their food, and we would give them a cheese sandwich instead. That practice was undone prior to COVID. During COVID, nobody paid for meals. We were actually able to save quite a bit of money, which then allowed us for a year and almost now 2 years to supplement the cost of CEP. CEP will give us reimbursement for the students that qualify for free lunch. Those are judged by the families that receive SNAP or Husky at a higher rate than it does for families that would have paid otherwise. So what we're actually paying for are for the kids that would not have qualified for free reduced lunch to make up the difference in that reimbursement rate. It's about the same that we would have paid if we had not gone to CEP. So then we made the decision to go to CEP. If we're going to be out $1 million, at least this way, everybody eats for free, especially in the heels of COVID, with all of the changes that families had and the hardships that families had. So that's the brief history.
So now we get to the big bucket, the general fund. So what I wanted to do by introducing the general fund is kind of talk about just recent history. We always bring to you in the general fund what we feel is the need for that year. This is not unique to this administration. This has historically been the way that Board of Eds have presented their budget. So what I did with this chart is just to look at the historical request going back to 17-18 to current. So you'll see what previous administrations and this administration have requested from the city by way of funding. And then the chart right next to it is obviously, we know that, the city, there's a city budget process, there's concerns about taxpayers and all of that, which we understand. And therefore, that is a history of what has actually been approved by the city. So you could see that there's always a delta between what we ask and what we need and what we get. And so as part of the budget process this year at the beginning, there is that process of reconciliation where we have to make those two numbers tie. So what we present now is our best estimate of the needs and talk about the drivers. Superintendent mentioned what is driving the budget. So I think it's important to point out that boards of ed have typically always requested what they've been needing. This year, and there's a slide that will talk to it, you will see that, for example, with our special education, we are falling behind to the tune of $1.7, $1.8 million. You recall that each month we bring to you a series of transfers, and what we've been doing is we look at accounts that we anticipate that we may not need throughout the end of the year, and so we kind of sweep those accounts as we go through the year. Past couple of years, we've been able to meet that need. I think this year is going to be a challenge, just given the year, how this budget was approved. In looking at other districts, so we're anticipating a $2 million. There's an article recently with Darien. I believe Darien is looking at a $500,000 deficit this fiscal year. And so they're potentially going over budget, and we'll have to go back to their town to get a special appropriation. Danbury is also experiencing similar challenges. I think initially there's actually rumors that they may not be able to make payroll the last 2 months of the year. So the challenges that districts are facing financially is not unique to Norwalk. We see it all around us. But I think it's important to kind of share that information with you as we start diving into the numbers. So I have what you have for this year. We were initially at 9.0. The ask is actually 8.3, and I'll get to that. But just to recap the budget that we're in, how we got this budget approved. You recall that we began FY23 with 217 million. Our ask this time last year was 12.7. As we went through the reconciliation process, we were approved 4%. And so we had to make those adjustments, as you see in this chart, to reconcile to that 4%. We were fortunate last year that we received some additional grants. We were able to help with that. We had carryover funds from 2 prior years that we had not used. And so we were able to apply those to balance the budget. And you recall, as we were approaching towards the end, the mayor was able to provide the district with the city's ARPA funds to the tune of $2.5 million. So that allowed us to lower that $18.9 million gap. But we still had to make an additional $11.8 million in reductions, and that's how we got to the 4%. So that is our starting point this year as we go into this budget. As I've shared before, is 85% of our general fund budget and grant budget is salaries and benefits. So what this chart here is looking at are FTEs just to get a sense of where are these FTEs within the organization. You'll see that in the local budget, this preliminary budget has just over 1,700 positions. Those 1,700 positions are distributed, as you can see on this chart. A majority of our positions are in our schools. And then you'll see that a smaller percentage is in our support services, including transportation, instructional support, finance, digital learning. And that is true on the grant side as well. On the grant side, this budget has 188 positions. And again, those positions are concentrated in the schools and some additional support work within the district. For FY25, you'll see this chart that kind of shows a summary of staffing changes. You'll see that in the current budget that was approved, we approved a budget of combined local and grant of just over 1,800 positions. This request that you have in front of you, preliminary request, has an increase of 46 positions. You can see from this chart where those positions are coming from. You'll see that the driver of the positions are in our paraeducators. They support our teaching staff. Majority of those paraeducators are related to special education services. I mentioned earlier that we received the Magnet School Assistance Program, and that came with 9 positions. And so those positions are also part of this mix. When you look at that 46% increase, some of those are related to grants that we received and the associated positions. So what this chart does, it shows you the 3-year history divided between local and grant and total. So you can kind of see where those increases are. And again, you'll see that the majority of those are in our professionals providing support to our students. So in terms of what are the drivers, the preliminary numbers that we've presented to you represent an 8.3% request year over year from the current year. And this slide here shows you what the drivers are that are driving that number and how each of those drivers ties to our strategic goals. So we see the strategic goal on the side that coincides with that request. So we have about 1.5% of $3.4 million directly related to salaries. These are contractual increases that we must make to employees. The superintendent mentioned what the superintendent had done at the beginning of this cycle was engage with teachers, a group of teachers, what do we call it? Cohort of teachers to get information on what their needs are. And one of the things that we heard from them, specifically elementary school teachers, was the additional planning time. And so what we did was we tried to monetize in order to make that happen and release times. How much would that cost the district? And that is about $2 million because you have to provide support for those teachers when they're not in the classroom when they're planning. And so that is a driver for this budget. We have a number of magnet schools, and in the past, we used to provide supplemental funding to schools that have magnet programs for various needs. The year that passed, as we were making those reductions, we initially had the $2 million, but we had to take it out because we had to reconcile to the 4%. And therefore, this budget does have that $2 million reinstated, as we've had in previous years, for supporting our magnet schools and the programming needs that they have within the schools. We've talked about the needs for special education. This year alone, we're looking at a potentially $2 million deficit. And therefore, what we're proposing in this year is putting that money back in the budget to the tune of $3 million. We have some new buildings that have come online, and we've also seen an increase in utilities. We received, I believe we're seeing a 45% increase in rates. Part of the way we negotiate rates, we lock in rates for a period of time. we had locked in rates for a 5-year period. That 5-year period is sunsets, and therefore it reopens for negotiation. The utility providers cannot wait for you to get out of that lock so that they can renegotiate, because for that 5-year period, they could not increase those rates. And so now they're kind of playing catch up. And so we have those increases. We talked about the school lunch fund deficit, 1.2 million, so that's included within the budget. We have our custodial contracts that are providing services. You recall that we started to outsource those services. Those contracts go up on an annual basis, so that's included. We also have transportation contracts for transporting our students to various places. So those are also included. And then, as we had mentioned earlier, you'll see that the mayor had provided $2.5 million last year to offset some of those increases. Some of those expenses have gone away, but we still have about 1.3 million of that 2.5 in recurring expenses, and so those are included. So if you add all of those costs, and that's how you get to the 18.8 million. And again, all of this is detailed in the detail level object summaries that you have. Another major driver of our budget is health insurance. That's a huge driver of, when I say salaries and benefits, benefits is primarily health insurance. Currently, we have 2 plans. We have some of our employees that are on the State Partnership Plan 2.0 that we've been on for about 6 or 7 years, and we recently transitioned our NFT members to the Cigna High Deductible Plan. So as far as the State Partnership Plan, the one thing that's beneficial to that is, you recall, before we did that, we were self-insured, and there's a lot of fluctuations when you are. Being on a fully insured plan, such as the state plan, has allowed us to stabilize our rates. It doesn't fluctuate as much. So a period of 6 or 7 years, we've been relatively stable. We were on a call, I believe it was last month, and typically the state will give us preliminary numbers of what they anticipate those increases to be. They had told us that it'll be anywhere between 5 to 7%. We typically start budgeting at the 7% and hope that it gets lower. So our assumptions for the State Partnership Plan is 7%. This is the same plan that the city is on, and so they too are budgeting the same as we are. And other cities around the district that are on the state plan follow the same procedure. Each year, we have a component of our premium cost share where we provide share to insurance for our employees' premiums. And so what we've been negotiating on contracts is a gradual increase. So the employees pay slightly more and the district pays slightly less. So the district this year is paying about 1% less, and the employees are picking up about 1% more as far as health insurance. So we've built those numbers in driving this. On the Cigna High Deductible Plan, where the NFT members are on, in reaching out to get an estimate, we only have, or they only have, 2-3 months of history. So it's still early for them to give us an estimate of what that would be. But when we went out for bid last year, we had asked them to give us a cap, a not to exceed amount. And so what we have in the budget, the cap they gave us was 15%. We hope that that rate doesn't go higher. I mean, doesn't come to 15%. It becomes more consistent with the state plan. But for purposes of budgeting, that's the number that we have. So we've capped it at 15 with the hope that as we go through the budget, we will get some more realistic numbers and possibly we could bring that number down. You'll recall a couple of years ago, we had budgeted a smaller number and it came higher later in the budget process, which is something we're trying to avoid this year. And likewise, with NFT members, there is a premium cost share increase of about 0.5% this year. When we had that transition, we did anticipate a reduction in premiums when the teachers transition because it is a high deductible plan. So once you net out the increase in premiums, the number of people, the mix of people that are there, we are able this year to somewhat lower the contributions to the health insurance fund by about $2.5 million. And you'll see that when you look at the benefits account. So that's a brief on the health insurance. And this chart basically just explains those premium cost share by union as we are this year. So I will pause there for questions, and then we will dig into some of the drivers, specifically special education. And I'll have Mr. Pennington come up and kind of walk us through those. But if there are any questions on the general fund, the drivers, health insurance, I'd be happy to answer those at this time before we proceed.
I don't have a question, but I'm glad it's not 15%, because when I saw that number, I was like, this.
Well, we're all hopefully it won't be. That is the cap that they set.
I was gonna ask, what would you say are the top 3 or 4 drivers, but I guess you're gonna get into that, right?
Just kind of want to clarify a couple things. Going back to the grants,
Go
fund.
to the page so that we know.
I'm sorry, this is slide 16. We talked about the federal grants ending, and I see that for current fiscal year, we have about $3 million in ESSER 3 that we have applied, 2.9,
Yes.
and that's going to go down to 900 next year.
Yes, and so, and ESSER is tricky, so the 2.9, remember when last year we were talking about the phasing out of ESSER and we only had about $3 million left and we had funded some expenses, programs, positions, and so that's where that was. That particular piece has gone away. There is a new sliver of ESSER, like an addendum to that program that they provided us to the tune of 900,000, but it's a different program than the original Corona program, but it's still under the ESSER 3 title.
So my question is, are we transferring that $2 million delta to the local grant, to the local fund?
Some, yes.
Okay. And then on slide 21, when we did document for you and wish him well, but the cabinet staff count didn't change for
It will change when we present to you the recommended, so this still includes, still includes Dr. McBride. So
Okay.
when we come back to you next week, we'll revise these numbers and that number will drop to 6.
And also, like, just to note, the ed admins that are there are associated with the MSAP grant. 4 out of the 5. So those numbers are more associated with the $3 million grant that came in for this year.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
So for the school lunch fund, going forward, we have nothing coming from any state or any.
We have
do
money
some
coming
money.
in, it just
Okay.
doesn't fully cover.
Okay,
Right, so on the $7 million budget, we're short 1.2, so we have about $5 million that comes in.
that comes in, okay, gotcha.
Yet when you look at historically, which is one of the points that Sandra was trying to make earlier, we were investing that amount anyway. So it just makes sense to make sure that every child is fed.
And that's common throughout Connecticut, throughout districts.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed this, that you, on slide 18, we said the preliminary request is about 9%.
8.3. 8.3.
Got it. So this 9 is.
It was what we were originally calculating, then after further review was reduced to 8.3. We'll update that slide to avoid confusion. Because somebody seeing it is not going to understand that that's what we were, and we were able to further reduce to 8.3.
Right, good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about specialized learning. And I think that the first chart is a really important chart for us to look at. One of the main reasons is that you do see an increase in our prevalence rate, number of students identified to receive specialized services. We are currently just over 15 or 15.7% this year. And I want to frame that if you were to go pre-COVID, the national rate across the country was 12%. Right now in 2022, well, in 2022, the national rate is 15%. The state of Connecticut is 17.1. So I want to frame that we are in line more with the national average than with the state.
El promedio nacional.
We are less than
Tenemos menos que el promedio del estado.
With interference, but he's translating well.
Right.
Usually get to hear that.
And so going back to that
Viendo esto que
enrollment, we see
la reiteración, podemos ver
enrollment hasn't had a huge influx, but the number of students that,
el número de estudiantes que
so I think that that's an important piece because there is more of a cost with supporting more students. So
Can you restate that? I don't know if people really heard you because it was echoed,
Yes.
but
sure, absolutely. So while our overall enrollment hasn't had a huge increase, the number of students receiving services has had an increase. So if you were to look, our number went up from last year. We're around 15.1%. We're now 15.7%. So we see this increase in number of students. Last year, we were around 1,750. And this year, as of right now, we haven't gotten our formalized report. We are roughly in the mid 1800s. So I think it's one point in time, but I just want to frame that that is the current number. So you can see that increase in students receiving services. All right, and that does have more of a cost. So we have developed and we continue to develop more programs to support students in district. And over time, I think we could go back to 2017, there was an investment by the city, $3 million to start to develop programs. And below you can see some of our programs and the number of students that are in these programs and how they have increased. Some have remained stagnant or dipped a little because demand and shift in needs. But we haven't fully developed all of our programs. An example, at Fox Run, we have the Pine program there, and 4 out of the 6 grades currently have Pine. So next year, we will expand and add another program. And so that's built into our budget, that expansion, so that over the next couple of years, we will have a K-5 model at Fox Run. Now, at PONUS, where we have the 6-8 model, that is fully developed, 3 grades versus 6 grades. And so that is something that will have a cost that we have to develop those 2 classrooms over time. We have a co-teaching model at Kendall and at Jefferson and at Brookside, and those are not fully developed. So at Kendall, 4 out of 6 grades have co-teaching. And so next year, we will add another classroom at Kendall. At Jefferson, we started 2 years ago because we saw a need. So they are currently in 2 grades. So we are going to be developing Jefferson over the next 4 years, where every year we will add another class, another co-teaching classroom. So as kindergarten is coming in, we're creating those classrooms to support our students and families. And that is something that we're continually developing and we're analyzing. Last year, we talked about that we were seeing different needs and the idea of trying to create a classroom based on some of the needs that we are seeing. And the specialized learning team this year we're piloting a new program, right now the name is still in flux, but it's the RISE program. And it's really to support students who may have some emotional dysregulation, but that are still in the classroom, but may need supports throughout the day. And so that is a new program this year that we are piloting and developing and to support our students across the district. As you look, you can see our Project Search program has increased. We talked last year how we really added to that program. We've been at the community college, but last year we expanded into the hospital. And it's really been a game changer for our students. And that has increased in students looking to come here. Other towns have reached out. We've heard about your program. We would love to have our child go to your district. And that's great because there is a financial commitment that we can then bring into the district to support our programs. All right. So out of district, I think that this is an important slide. We can see total cost. So if I was looking at last year, I'm just going to use the last 2 years to frame our budget for specialized learning. It was a little over $9 million, but our actual costs last year came 10.9. So just to give you a frame of cost for next year, for this year, sorry. For this year, we have 10.7 budgeted, and our predictions are we're going to be just over 12 million. So it'll be right around $12 million. And there's a lot of reasons for this increase, and I'll talk a little bit about them. One of the reasons is that we use a variety of providers, a variety of placements that our students could go to. Our amazing finance team pulled over a dozen of our providers to look at cost last year compared to cost this year. On average, and I want to say on average because some are a lot smaller and some are a lot higher, but on average, the increase is about 10%. So if I'm going to just use a number, if an outplacement cost $200,000 last year, this year it costs $220,000. So that is one of the factors that has created an increase in cost. Another factor that I'll go into more detail in a little bit is we support students till the end of the 22nd year. The year they turn 22, we support students until the end of that school year. And that is a new law this year that was passed on July 1st. And that policy alone, or that mandate alone, unfunded mandate alone, cost the district $600,000. And that's going to shift depending on students' birthdays and how many students are turning 22 that year. So I think that's important, but just looking at this year, so those are some of the factors as to why we see an increase. And I think that that's an important piece. I'm going to go to the next slide. This is our current number of out-of-district students and settlements. And if you were to look this year, our number is at 110 students. It is up from 104 last year, so there are 6 more students. As I stated in the last slide, we do have students who stayed with us for this year that may have ended last year under prior legislation. If we were to go back to 2016 and track numbers over time, our predictive, and I want to make sure that I say this, it's predictive. We would, if we did not implement those programs, we would be at roughly 210 students. So I think that the programs that I highlighted earlier are really important because we support students in our schools. They have the opportunity to have class with friends, with peers, and I think that that is really important. Going to the next slide. This looks at our prediction of what it would have cost if we didn't implement those programs. So the last slide I mentioned we'd be roughly 210 students. We would be, if we didn't implement programs back in 2016, we would be close to spending $22 million this year. That's what our predictive value would come across. So we are $10 million less because we have programs this year. over the course of time, I added up the numbers because I think it's really important to highlight those programs that were embedded into our district have saved the district close to $66 million. So just to give you a rough estimate, over time, and that is predictive, but I do think it is important to share that when we can support students by building programs in district, it's great for students, and it also saves us from out-of-district costs. And then I did mention the cost of extending the age to 22. And this year, $595,152 to support students who would have ended sometime this year, because the prior litigation was you go to the day before legislation was that you go to the day before your 22nd birthday. And before that, it was 21. So they went from 21 to the day before your 22nd birthday, and now we go until the end of this year. So a student whose birthday was in July would have ended last year, but now we are supporting that student throughout this year until the end of the school year. So I just want to highlight that piece because there is a cost to it. And the last slide is just a case study. If a student was outplaced versus a student supported in district, and you can see the orange line highlights a student that is outplaced over time. You can see the increased costs, roughly just under 200,000 in case study 1, going up to over 250,000 over time. But with the new, it also depends, because as I said, what we're noticing is an increased cost of placements. With that 10% increase, it could actually be higher than that versus the cost of supporting students in district, which is going up, but at it's a substantially lower rate. And then I just had another case study that did very different program. So in case study 1, they're in a specialized program, and in case studies 2, we're supporting the student in a general ed classroom. So I just wanted to highlight this idea of the importance of programs that we have and how we look to try to develop programs, but also the costs associated with the out-of-district placements.
And this is the last slide. So again, just to kind of wrap up with the general fund, to your point, Colin, the request, the preliminary request this year is 8.3%. And so you could see how it breaks down by the different buckets, salaries, professional services. I mentioned earlier, if you look at that benefits line, there's a 7.1% decrease. And that's where you see that potential savings reduction in what we're doing with benefits transfers into the fund. And then you see there the outlier, the 1.2 million transfer, what we're budgeting for to support the school lunch fund and our children. But I just wanted to share those with you. And at this point, we are happy to answer any questions that you may have related to the operating components of the budget.
So you said the out of district, you budgeted 10 million, right?
This year, 10.7.
10.7, and then look, and it's going to 12.
We're predicting that it'll be right around 12 million at the end of this year.
That 3 million that I saw from IDEA, right? Right. So is that the only money that you really get to go towards that?
So
And are you expected to make up the other 8 million from that?
well, we budget and we have IDEA grants, we have excess cost grants as well, because when you spend X amount of dollars on a student, you actually do get some of that money back.
But there's still a gap though, it sounds like.
There's still a gap that we balance.
And then some of that has to go towards some other things too. I mean, ECS is not just for that, but.
Correct.
Rob, when we're looking at the slide 32, the 2 case studies, am I understanding it right that the one on the left, which is a little more expensive, that would be a child that is in a program like Pine or.
Should be, yes.
Or something specific, and the other case study might be somebody who's in a pre-thought class. So
That's a
that,
perfect comparison.
okay, so I'm getting that right. And then on the budget, this is just an overall kind of dreamy question. Did you even think of what our percent ask might be if we got the grant for Prime McMahon HVAC and a couple other grants? Did you, I mean, are, you know, the best case scenario?
Sure, so specifically to the Brian McMahon HVAC, that's on the operating budget side.
Right,
So it wouldn't necessarily,
Wouldn't-
it would be, sorry, it's on the capital budget side and it wouldn't impact the operating budget.
got it. Right, okay,
Thank you, Carmen.
okay, I was dreaming a little bit.
Rob, can I just ask, what is the difference on 29? What is the difference between a non-parent placement and a parent placement?
Sure, there are times where we will have settlements. And you're looking at.
29.
Yes. So in the blue bar, we have 85 students who are outplaced. That is done through our district team.
Okay.
And then there are times where we would have a settlement with a family,
Okay.
but it's not through our district team. It's a parent is looking to
Okay.
outplace their child, and
So
we
it's
come to an agreement through a settlement.
who's initiating it? The difference. Thanks.
A question about slide 27. And it's really, I think, helpful to see how some of these programs, started and have continued to grow and are projected to grow even more. And you said, for example, like when Pine expands to a new grade in at Jefferson.
Foxtrot.
At Foxtrot, sorry.
Yes, Foxtrot.
Or the co-teaching at where we have those.
Kendall.
You said those are projected to increase, to add more classrooms over time. But like, how is that reflected in the budget? Like, because.
So when I go to make a budget request, Linda asks for the budget request, we start in October. We have to build that into our request. So as we're looking, we say, we know that next year we need to continue to add co-taught classrooms. And so part of my request into finance is we need 3 teachers for co-taught classrooms. And then it may be, we've noticed that we've seen an uptick in occupational therapy. We would like to add another OT. And then part of our budget conversations, we talk about that through the process.
Got it. So when we talk about something, a program expanding by grade over the next 3 years, it's the asterisk is contingent on budget approvals. Yeah. Okay. And then, sorry, one more question. On slide 28, it actually is interesting to hear about, folks in other districts who might be interested in like our project search program and so on, and that may have a revenue impact to Norwalk. So when we look at the cost of these out of district placements on this slide, is that net of revenue, or is that's just what we're paying and it doesn't necessarily reflect what we might be making in placements?
Cool. I mean, this is what we are paying out.
Okay.
And then if there was something to cut that would come in, we would put it against this.
Got it. And this is not a question, but more a comment for the record, because I think we talk about this every year, like on slide 30, which I love, the projection of what we would be paying if we didn't have these capacities in district. I think it's always important to remind folks in the room and who may be watching is that this isn't a choice we have. These are legal requirements that we have, whether it costs 2 million or 20, we have to do it. And so we prefer to pay 2. So.
And that's why it's critical to continue to strengthen our programs and to expand, to provide families in district options
Yes.
that they feel comfortable with either transitioning their students with. It was actually, we were with an SGC group this earlier today, and some people were talking about how they transitioned their child back in district because the reputation that some of our children have developed. So it was really good to hear that families are feeling comfortable in bringing their students back from outplaced environments as well. So, unless there are other questions, that concludes the workshop presentation around the budget. I just want to reiterate the importance of some of the key things that we spoke about. One, our focus on continuing the academic programs that we have in play, continuing to reduce costs around special education despite the increased costs associated with some of our outplaced services continuing to be a challenge, and most importantly, increasing professional learning opportunities for our staff by providing them more planning and team collaboration time across elementary schools. Are going to be critical for us to continue to do the work that we're doing and do it well. So we're hoping that as we enter this budget cycle, that we can have collaborative and amicable conversations with the city around our needs and the importance to do this work, right? The stronger our schools, the stronger our students will be when they leave our system and go out in the world, it's either directly out of high school or after they acquire some level of higher education. And I think it's important to note that the stronger our schools are, the stronger the future of our city will be. And as we make investments, we have to keep that in mind. These are long-term investments that will benefit the city at large, not just for this year or next year, but for many years to come. With that, I'll turn it over to Chairperson Carpio.
Well, first of all, thank you to Dr. Estrella and cabinet and team, because I know that this takes months and months of putting together and crunching numbers. And at the same time, we can say months, but I know that as of this morning, you guys are still looking at numbers and it takes a lot. And this is just the beginning. We have months to discuss, months to have conversations, months to have lots of questions. And I was actually at the SGC meeting, and to hear the mom say that she reached out to her advocate to say, I want back into NPS. That was a shocker, right? And even for the advocate, she had to question the mom and say, did I hear you right? You want to go back to NPS? And the mom said, absolutely. So that shows, what great job NPS is doing and staff. But before we continue, any other comments on the great work that's being done this evening?
I thought it was a fantastic presentation. It was very thorough as usual. Everybody who presented was fantastic. I had a full grasp of the information as we were going along, so I found it very, very informative for me. Thank you, guys.
I just want to make, not to correct you, Linda, but when you made reference to the budget book from last year, you forgot to say award-winning.
Thank you.
Okay. I will pass it actually to Sherry McCready Pritchett for any type of public comments.
So are there any email comments that came in? If there are, then they could be included in the minutes of it.
Yes, yes.
Right, so has anybody signed up?
No, no one's on, well, we have one sign up and it's Mary. And then there's no one online.
So you are going to state your name and address, and you got 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'll be brief because it's late. I'm Mary Jordan with the Norwalk Federation of Teachers, 9 Mott Avenue, Suite 302. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. The Board of Education Union Coalition budget goals are as follows. Staff retention. We would provide a supportive and positive work environment in which staff members are valued versus creating an environment where educators are made to believe they are not good enough, not doing enough, fast enough, or made to feel they're incompetent. We support planning time for elementary teachers, as has been discussed, by providing hiring additional specialists, updating the schedules of elementary teachers. Art, music, PE, band, orchestra, media center, and other specialists provide important instruction that applies core academics in practical ways that support the growth of the whole child. We would fund additional cafeteria and recess monitors. Fund additional general education paras, not just for oversubscribed classrooms, but to cover short unplanned absences in the buildings, to assist with responding to the increasing numbers of disruptive behaviors and monitoring safety in these classrooms. Fund special education paras to support co-taught classrooms, essentials and academic assistant classrooms. Trumbull, Stanford, Fairfield, New Britain, and many other districts have a higher level of special education non-certified staffing than Norwalk. District-wide funding of special education teachers, social workers, counselors, and other certified providers. Caseloads are sometimes double as compared to competing districts. Disallow cuts to the counseling and social work staff, as happened in the last budget cycle. Provide more support for MLL new arrival students, such as MLL teachers and paras and courses that benefit our MLLs. MLLs should include all languages, including Haitian Creole. Seeing the district's accountability report as received from the state of Connecticut. We request to eliminate custodial and security outsourcing, since the work of the affiliated staff members is superior to outsourced work. Reduce the number of administrators in central office, including consultants. New positions should be created with the input of bargaining units versus positions being created and made unaffiliated. Made respectfully and on behalf of Lynn Moore of NASA, myself from NFT, Hope Wyatt of NFEP, and Ryan Morris of UPSU. We appreciate the work that goes into preparing this document and that you all will be putting into making it all real in the next school year. Thank you.
All right, it's late in the evening and all this great information. I know everybody's gonna go home and think about it all night long, right? So, motion to adjourn,
So moved.
Colin, seconded by Sarah. Well, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is.